Okay, we move on to chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3 dealt with the first big trip that I took, which was, of course, to Chicago, and it was recounted quite well in the book. The only additional idea or thought came to my mind as I reviewed that chapter was, of course, my favorite baseball player was Ted Williams. Played for the Boston Red Sox, greatest hitter in the history of baseball. And I talked about that in the book. But one thing I didn't talk about was Ted Williams' number on the back of his uniform was 9. His number was number 9. So as a result, my favorite number in my whole life has been the number 9, to honor Ted Williams and the great player that he was. So if ever you have a question as to what my favorite number is, or what my password or coat is, it will always have a 9 in it because of Ted Williams. Now, chapter 4 dealt with my first job, securing my first job, and as I read through that chapter, there were 2 or 3 thoughts that came to my mind. I mentioned I got a job with El Paso Phosphate plant in Soda Springs after we first moved there. I think I was between my junior and senior years, I recall. And I ran a water truck, and I mentioned the tool crib in that chapter, and it described what it was. Well, one of the things that I did with the tool crib is run a pickup truck, go back to the tool crib, grab a wrench or tools or nuts and bolts or a part that would facilitate the maintenance people to be faster with their maintenance efforts, rather than walking all the way down the plant and then walking all the way back. They just called the tool crib, said we need the come along or this tool or this wrench or these bolts or this part, and I would secure them from the tool crib and the parts department there at the plant, and put them in the old pickup, run them down to the appropriate spot where the maintenance people were working, and it would speed things up immeasurably. Well, being the go-getter that I hoped I was, one of the places where I would go quite regularly is called the Ball Mill. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it doesn't matter. But I took some tools down to the maintenance people at the Ball Mill, and it required me to go down a large, long hallway that was lit for the most part to get back to where they were working. Well, when I was walking down the hallway, there were 2 lights on the ceiling of the hallway that were burned out. And I thought, note to self, next time I come to the Ball Mill, I will bring a ladder and a couple of light bulbs and make it lighter in here like it should be. So, day went on. Later in the day, we got another call from the Ball Mill. We need such and such. I don't remember what it was, and the thought process kicked in. Oh, hey, need a ladder so that I can get up and go get 2 large light bulbs so that I can change those lights out and make the hallway illuminate like it should. Well, I did that. I took the maintenance people down their materials. Then I went back and got the ladder and the bulbs and went down the hall again and jumped up on the ladder and was unscrewing the light bulbs, and all of a sudden I hear some screaming down at the other end of the hall. I couldn't understand even what they were screaming about or who they were screaming at. But come to find out, to make a long story short, they were screaming at me. They came running down the hall, and the foreman said, "Are you a certified electrician?" And I thought he was kidding. I started to giggle. I said, no, yeah, I'm a sort of, no, I don't know if I'd said I was or wasn't, but I was laughing. And he wasn't laughing. He was serious. He said, "You've got to be a certified electrician to work on the electrical parts, the electrical systems in this plant." And I still thought he was kidding. I said, "Well, I'm no Phi Beta Kappa, but I believe I can change out a light bulb. Lefty loosey, righty tighty, and I believe we can get her done here. He said, no, no, no. If I ever catch you doing that again, you've just lost your job. OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, dictates these kinds of idiocies. Now I'm all, if I was working on a real technical part of the plant, and I shouldn't be working on it, but I believe I can unscrew a light bulb, but OSHA would not allow it. And so I learned a little something about OSHA at that point because of my experience in the ball mill at El Paso. Okay, one other thing. I mentioned I secured a job the next year with Monsanto, which was another phosphate plant. My dad was the office manager at Monsanto. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or the fact that I played ball at Soda Springs. I don't know if any of that had anything to do with it. Probably didn't hurt. But at any rate, so I got a job with Monsanto as a tapper on the furnace deck. And I described tapping. It was the miserable job. There were, I don't say poisonous gases, but you couldn't stand to breathe them around those tapping holes where the slag would come out and go into those sand runners and then out into the pit. But at any rate, the Monsanto's plant every year at about the same time, usually in the fall, early fall, they would shut down for a couple of weeks so that they could dig out those 3 huge furnaces that produce the phosphate, or the liquid phosphate. That required digging out those 3 huge furnaces. Now, you say digging out. Like I mentioned, the temperatures in those furnaces were 3,000 degrees. It was molten rock. It's like a volcano. And it took several days, to even cool down, even with the lid off of the furnace, several days for it to cool down enough. But then the Dravot was the personnel department in Monsanto. They provided the personnel for special projects such as this. And so it fell to me to help dig out these furnaces. I have never seen a job like this before nor since. Like I said, 3,000 degrees, and the rock had now cooled a bit, but we took jackhammers, air jackhammers, down into those furnaces on ladders with the asbestos and the big thick-soled shoes down in there, and jackhammered the walls of those furnaces so that they could run more efficiently. Well, descending down on those ladders into those furnaces, the only thing I can liken it to is descending into hell. It was, you could only stand to be down there at the maximum 10 minutes. Then you had to come back up because you'd burn up. Your feet would burn up, your soles of your shoes and all that stuff. And the air was foul and it was awful. So the group that you went down with would come up, then the next group would go down, and there were 3 groups that every 10 minutes they would rotate. Go down, jackhammer, come back up. Horrible job, horrible job. But we did it every fall. I did it a couple of falls. It was a tough job. Now, I mentioned Dravot, the personnel for special projects in the plant there at Monsanto. Well, I don't know. They must have enjoyed what I did or how I did it, but Dravot ended up offering me a job as the personnel manager for Dravot to coordinate all of these projects and get the people involved and there and working in the various projects that Dravot was responsible for. Just before I left for college, they offered me a job. And I don't remember the pay, but I do remember this. As I turned down the job, I remember thinking, I have just turned down a job that will pay twice as much as what I'm going to be making as a teacher in the school district. Twice. And I was just a punk kid, but in retrospect, I would have made a lot more money if I'd have stayed with that, but I have enjoyed the teaching so much. I love every aspect of teaching except payday. Payday has never been what it needs to be. Still isn't, to tell you the truth. It still is not. It's much better now, but for example, after 5 years of teaching, I think I mentioned this in the book somewhere, but after 5 years of teaching, I was taking home $535 a month, taking home. And you can't live on $535 a month, impossible. So that was the only reason I got out of teaching. I mentioned that at the end. There were some articles, I think, that were taken, and I mentioned the only reason I got out of teaching initially was my family couldn't live on it. I had 2 kids and there were more to come. My wife was working harder than I was, and so I just could not afford to stay into teaching, and so I went with the Intermountain West Insulation general manager, and I enjoyed that, but nowhere near as much as I enjoyed teaching. So that was another one there. Now let's see here. Oh, one last thing on that one. I mentioned that I went to lots of extracurricular activities at Highland High School after I secured that first teaching job in 1973. The ball games, and Vicki and I went on tour with the choir to California and other places, and so Vic kind of just tolerated it. I enjoyed it, but that wasn't her favorite thing even back then. But she went, and we had a lot of fun. But the games and the concerts and the volley, everything, the theater, drill teams, all of those. My kids that I was teaching were in all of those things, and so I'd try and support them and go. One of my jobs, I remember this one of the first things I did in my first year of teaching was I was assigned, I didn't volunteer for this, but I was assigned, and they'd pay you a little bit if you worked these games. And Highland and Pocatello were bitter rivals, of course, crosstown rivals in everything, but particularly football. My first year, I volunteered to help out at the ball game, whether taking tickets or whatever. My assigned spot was to sit between the 2 pep clubs. They were both on the same side of the mini dome, Pocatello on one side of the 50 and Highland on the other side of the 50. And I thought, oh, well, that'll be a piece of cake. Not that, a bunch of girls pep clubbing, rickety-ree, kick him in the knee, rickety ras, kick him in the other knee, kind of a deal. Just kidding on that one. At any rate, so I thought, well, that'll be easy. Well, no. During the game, those girls were just brutal. I mean, I thought I had enlisted in the Navy. I was hearing epithets that I had never heard of before, much less from girls. And back and forth from both sides, and so I didn't get any bargain sitting between those 2 pep clubs. And that was back in, like I say, about 1973. And it's gotten, the language has gotten more coarse and worse and more graphic even now. But even back then, like I say, I thought I'd enlisted in the Navy because there was stuff I was hearing there that I hadn't heard before. But it wasn't too kind. So those are some thoughts that I had about the first job. Those are the chapters 3 and 4. Thanks very much.